Stewardship can be simply just being a caretaker, or stewardship can be much more active. And we're taking a very active role in managing the resources that we happen to own for the good of the future. That includes, employing young talent like Tyler and Adam, and bringing other people into the mix to learn from them and exchange knowledge. We've had field days where we've shared what we're doing. So I see those as all elements of stewardship, not just holding tight to a place, but making it possible for others to learn and benefit. And in the exchange, I hope we learn and benefit from the knowledge. And I feel like some of the places that's happened has been around climate and new practices in forest, and the prescribed fire is all about stewardship. That we are hopefully our landscape will not be a contributor to the bigger problems when fire does come through by taking care of what we have.
Welcome to the Forest Overstory with WSU Extension Forestry. The Forest Overstory is a podcast that provides insight and education into the field of forest management, helping landowners to become better stewards of their forest. The Forest Overstory is brought to you by the Society of American Foresters and the Inland Empire Chapter. All right, thank you very much for coming out today, listeners. Welcome to the 7th episode of the Forest Overstory podcast. Today we are joined by Martha Wyckoff, who is a landowner in Cle Elum, Washington. We are also joined by two individuals who are working for her. I will let them introduce themselves a little bit further, but their names are Tyler Larsen and Adam Hess. Thank you for joining the episode today. Martha, why don't you go ahead and just do a quick introduction of yourself, and then we'll have Tyler and Adam introduce themselves.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sean. My name is Martha Wyckoff, and my husband and I farm in the Cle Elum area. We're east of downtown Cle Elum by about 8 miles, and we have both dryland farming and some irrigated ground, which includes about 400 acres of forest. And for the subject today, we really are focused on the forest health work that we're doing on our forest ground. We are a small family farm business. We raise Timothy hay for the export market. And one of our objectives in stewarding this land has been to prepare for fire and be fire resilient and address climate, as it is an existential situation for all of us to be facing, and to have a healthy habitat and ecosystem at all levels, from soil to treetop in our forest. So we have, over the last year, hired 2 young scientists from Central Washington, and they are carrying on the bulk of the work. However, over the past 35 years, we've been preparing for the work that they've been doing just by doing Firewise and forest health management at a private level. Both my husband and I are very involved in land conservation and have been for over 30 years with the Trust for Public Land. So we start with the conservation ethic, and we really came to farming to keep farming as part of the fabric of a land conservation and community-based health and resiliency to community.
That's awesome. Tyler and Adam, why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves as well?
Go for it. So I'm Tyler Larsen. I'm from Ellensburg, and I'm a graduate of CWU in Ellensburg. Adam and I both graduated in their biology program, and met Martha through an event that we were doing where we were reseeding Umtanum Canyon after the Evans Canyon fire. And so she wanted 2 college graduate scientists to come up and do a forest inventory. And we've just kind of figured it out as we went along, and it's just still going.
Yeah, and I'm Adam Hess. Like Tyler said, biologist from Central Washington University. I grew up in Snohomish, moved here about 5 years ago to go to Central. I'm mostly interested in amphibians and reptiles, but now I'm just getting really into forestry. It's been like a great project, and I've learned a lot from it. Yeah.
Did either of you have any forestry background prior to working with Martha?
No.
I didn't really know. Yeah. Like I know, I have a couple family members who have small forests, so I help plant trees and put on browse protectors and spray blood on the trees to keep deer and elk from browsing on them, which was an interesting one. But other than that, no, I didn't really know anywhere near as much as I know now. That's for sure.
And I would add that they both are evidence of really good biology and science education at Central. I think that is the grounding that they bring. And then we have a consultant, Phil Hess, who's not related to Adam, but with the same last name, who's been at the high level leading the forest side of it, the forest science practices. So, but these two are formulating the plan and standing up. We've had some field days with climate scientists and public agency folks to talk about what we're doing, and they're creating a plan that's really their own, that's based on the science in the forest, and it's been very positive so far. The reception's been good.
Martha, before we dig into what you guys are doing and are going to do, I really want to hear a little more about the history of the farm, because you said 35 years. So there's a lot of history there. And I'm wondering, is this an intergenerational thing, or did you start it? Did you buy the land yourself? Can we get a little more background on what happened over those 35 years?
Yeah, about 30, almost 35 years ago, my former husband and I decided with three little boys that we would find a patch of getaway property out of Seattle. And we were raising our kids in Seattle, and we came over to Swak Prairie, which is part of our landscape here. It's an original prairie, and it's a really exceptional environment. And one thing led to another, and I became involved with trying to do land conservation around keeping agriculture lands in agriculture. And a number of the things I attempted didn't work, but eventually I was in a position where I was able to purchase some additional farm ground, which put us into being actual hands-on wheat farmers. So we actually did all the wheat farming for a number of years, up until 2000. Our last crop of winter wheat went in 2000. And after that, we started planting out to hay, because my kids were growing up and they'd been kind of the workforce in the summer times, and their lives were taking them in lots of different directions. Although this is ground zero for one of their favorite places on the planet, so it still brings everybody back. So from a little 40 acres with 20 acres of trees and 20 acres of forest, we've expanded significantly. And in 2014, we ended up buying some agricultural land with water rights, which became it has been an all-consuming project for us. And we're now full-time here operating both the dry land and the irrigated ground. But it gives us the opportunity to pay some serious attention to the forest land as well, which has captured both my husband and my commitment, because we see it as such a key to both the ecosystem health, the fire resiliency concerns, and also the water, which ultimately is so important for the fish, which we pay attention to as part of our landscape planning. But it's been one of the things that's been truly a privilege is to be a part of this community at the larger scale, and engaged in things like growth management planning, which I was on committees for growth management, and I've been serving since the origin of the Teanaway Community Forest on that advisory board, which is a terrific group of people. So the Teanaway Community Forest has played a role in that it's a great place for all parts of the community to come together to be thinking about a large landscape, which is 50,000 acres just up the road from us.
Wow. Now, for anybody who's listening, because we have audience members all across the United States and internationally, can you describe a little bit about kind of the forest type around Cle Elum and around your forest? So what is it you're managing, and can you kind of set that stage ecologically for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, out here it's pretty much like a ponderosa dry forest. There's some Douglas fir mixed in, but it's mostly a dry forest. We're in the rain shadow of the Cascades, and then there's a lot of grasslands and prairie around, as well as sagebrush when you get further east, and it gets a lot drier.
And what's been the land use history for that property? I guess maybe prior to your ownership and management of it.
It's since Western European migration to this area, which was in the 1880s to a large extent, it's always been in agriculture and just high grading forest for our particular properties. Up the road where the Teanaway Community Forest is, that was commercial forest ground. And then there's a lot of public agency land. The Department of Natural Resources is a boundary member, and the U.S. Forest Service is nearby. So we have quite a combination. But this is mining and forestry for a long history from the mid 1800s.
Would you say that you can see the legacy of that still on your land today, especially in terms of forest health?
Definitely. I think these guys should speak to that because they've been doing a great deal of the study of what we're learning.
Yeah, we've found that on one particular piece of land that we've been working on, that the forest there is actually relatively new. When we were going through aging trees, we're not finding any trees older than 120 years old. So that's led us to believe that forest is a new forest that is now there due to fire exclusion.
Yeah, it was 120 years ago that fire started being excluded here.
Yeah, and so we believe that was all at one time prairie, and now with fire exclusion has become a ponderosa dry forest, and Douglas fir is also moving in and encroaching on the grassland.
Have you guys been seeing much mortality in any of that Douglas fir as it's been moving into these drier sites?
It's actually doing pretty well. We have mistletoe up there. We have pine engraver beetle. There's a couple root rot pockets up there, but the Doug fir is actually doing really well for now. We expect if we have continued drought like we're having 20 years in the future, they might not be doing as well. But we'll see.
Yeah. So Martha, do you want to talk to us a little bit? You said conservation broadly is your goal. Can you explain maybe some more specifics of, what the focus of your management efforts have been? Like, why did you originally start to take an active role in managing your forest?
Well, I think fire has in the imminent concerns of mega fire and fire up the road that we've had certainly started to get our attention. And we are in the work that Tyler and Adam is doing is post preparation for being much more fire resilient and in a habitat too. I mean, we're very active birders and we love the wildlife. We love the hiking and the recreation. It's a dominant feature for us is to be enjoying our forest every day. So that is a value set that's really important to us. But about 2004, we took 90 truckloads off where the Doug fir was because it was frighteningly dense, and it was a new piece of ownership for us, and we started worrying about what would happen if it all burned up, and what our responsibilities at a community level would be if it all burned up, because we do have neighbors as well. So conservation comes from many different angles. It's about good, healthy land and good, healthy forest, and having we do have wolves, cougar, coyote, fox, we're down to the bobcats and all the other critters, lots of deer and elk. Those are very exciting and important, and having this forest healthy for them as well is something that we factor in. Our goal is a 50-year plan, that the forest is healthy for the next 50 years, and each incursion doesn't it will be done with that intention to keep kind of a 50-year plan going. So it's long term. Do we have to take revenue off the land? We will if it's necessary, but it is not the number one driving force for us. And I know that's a really important element of many family forests. So I value that a lot. It's a lower value concern for us, or interest. It's really about keeping a climate resilient place that can be a test, a test of time for habitat and people, and a good health to the community.
Yeah, it's a shared legacy, right? Something that you can see continuing on to the future that benefits both you and your surrounding areas. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd say too that you're definitely not alone in revenue not being your number one priority. We actually know that for a lot of landowners, it's exactly how you describe it. They may take some revenue off the land. They may harvest some timber if it coincides with their goals. But a lot of times it's exactly what you described: long-term health, resilience, legacy, enjoying the forest, enjoying the habitat, which I think is really awesome. It's one of the reasons that we really love working with forest owners.
One of the things that and I kind of mentioned early on, that Adam and Tyler have pushed us in a very, very positive and proactive way, is to be thinking about the ecotone between our true prairie and the ponderosa pine forest. And there's been it's an elevation change of, I don't know what, 800 feet, something like that. That we think, and they have proposed, that it was probably more prairie than it was forest. And when we think about the climate impacts of these landscapes, there is a high probability, from what we read and what these guys are researching, is that prairies are going to be a very important climate mitigation. And if a fire comes through, what burns above it is one thing, but we could have big, deep, healthy soils with a traditional prairie as well. So that's something we're experimenting with, and everything that they're doing, we put in an experimental model. We just say we're testing new ideas, some old ideas. We're trying to see what we can learn, and take in as many gurus that we can to learn more. And we've had great partners, Department of Natural Resources and Ken Bevis, one of your guests, has been on site and leading us on a couple of the conversations we've had around wildlife trees and wildlife piles, and so we've found some wonderful people have showed up to help.
One of the things I'd like to talk to you about, Martha, is you had mentioned that you've owned this property for 35 years, but it wasn't until, I think you said, early 2000s that you had done your first harvest. Is that correct?
We had done some earlier and done the work around just forest health, fire-wise for shorthand, as early as the late 80s, I think.
Oh, wow.
So we've done a variety over time.
I'm curious, for landowners maybe that are interested in taking an active management approach, but they don't really know where to get started. Can you talk a little bit about what that process looked like for you in terms of trying to find somebody, trying to find the information that you felt, gave you the best tools you needed? Can you kind of lay out that process maybe for somebody who's thinking about trying to take an active management role on their forest?
Sure. That's digging way deep in the memory. I think it started with, this forest looks like it needs some help, and I had met Phil through some community activities around growth management back in the late 80s, early 90s. And he was on his way to being a consultant at that time. So we retained him then, and he's been our consultant ever since. So I would strongly say for us having a professional who knew the ropes, and we were weekenders at that time, so it was harder to be fully attentive, and with little kids as well. So I think for us a really worthwhile step was to find a partner in a consultant who could guide us and work with us, and we both grew through the process. And I would just say I really started with it was very hard to think about taking down as many trees as we needed to do. And I'd sort of joke that I was the tree hugger, and didn't want to part with any one of them, but would. And over time, I really saw the importance of what Phil's advice and knowledge was, and we conferred a lot. It's been a very good relationship that way. So that was number one, and it also allowed for the plans, to have a forest practice plan for our property, which is something that is required, and one can do it independently. As you all know, you can write your own personal plan or have a professional do it. For us, it was worthwhile to have a professional. And as time went on, I think our interest just got deeper and deeper in doing more around true forest health, not just, we weren't looking to be a commercial forest in the long run. We weren't looking to only be a stand of trees for lumber, as important as having lumber is, we know. But so I think those for me, it was a stepwise. It didn't all happen at once. We didn't buy in all at once in doing it. And the evolution to coming to having Adam and Tyler doing the work they're doing has only connected us even more deeply to how cool these forests are, and what a pleasure it is to be working in them. And now we're all here every day. So it took time, and I think everyone can. It isn't something that has to happen rapidly. One of the other things that we're moving toward is prescribed fire, and we hope to be doing prescribed fire this year. So that's a long way from hugging every tree.
That's great. But I was going to ask about prescribed fire, and I want to talk about that, but I also want to dig at something you said about hugging trees and not, not really wanting to cut them down. It's something I totally empathize with and understand. And I just want to dig into that a little bit. And what was it like, create or developing your first timber harvest? And what did Phil say to comfort you and encourage you to go through with something like that? Because that can be a big leap. And then seeing, those stumps on the ground afterwards can probably be kind of tough too. So just kind of curious what that perspective is like.
Well, one of the great things that's changed is the stumps on the ground are now much higher off the ground, because we're doing a great deal of work to create habitat trees.
Great.
Wildlife trees. So it's a very different look. It's refreshing to have a healthy looking forest. And I would say we in the Northwest, I don't know if it's true anywhere else, but we in the Northwest for the last 120 years have started to assume our forests are extremely dense. And that's a real stressor these days on our forests. And I would think it's a stressor for any landowner worrying about major fires coming through. So taking in what the landscape looks like after doing some of the forest work we've done, we have more wildflowers, we have more birds, we have more cavity making critters in our land, on the landscape, and it just feels beautiful and healthy and vibrant. So I think that's one of the things I wouldn't have expected. And we know what a clear cut looks like. It's far from that. It's really stunningly beautiful. When it's first cut, it looks pretty raw, but it was a remarkable recovery. And we are on dry side. This is a place that things grow slowly, but the underbrush and Adam and Tyler did a whole plant survey last year as part of the work, so they could speak to what they saw after our projects, including mastication. So we should speak about that.
Well, I'm sure your forest would thank you for that, if it could. I mean, it sounds like you basically saw forest resilience in work, is what it sounds like to me. It came back after you gave it what it needed.
Yeah.
When we started this project, it was last April, and they had just done a big treatment where they removed a bunch of trees. They masticated lower limbs and logs, and when we got up there, it was like, whoa, because there's nothing on the ground. There's just masticated wood everywhere, and we were kind of skeptical about it. And then 2 months later, it was just blooming. We found 5 species of orchids on one hillside, and it bounced back really fast.
Yeah, I remember when I was actually visiting Martha prior to this interview, we were walking through her forest, and as we're walking, this herd of mule deer just walked through right past us, not even bothered by us, kind of looked at us and went, they're not a risk, and kept moving on as they were grazing along the bitter brush up the hillside. That was totally taking off as a result of the thinning in the area. It was really cool to see.
Yeah, they were probably okay with you because they're used to seeing us riding around on a gator.
I see them every day.
So maybe Tyler and Adam can answer this. Martha, you're going to have a little bit of the perspective of this question, having owned and been on the property prior to. But one of the things we love to talk about, especially when it comes to wildlife, is the wildlife communities that respond to a current state of structure. And so I'm curious, what was one of the first things, maybe for example, we'll say, what was the first bird species you saw respond to your property that you had not seen prior to any of the active management taking place on it? Is there anything in particular you can think of maybe that is new to your property?
Woodpeckers and sapsuckers, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
During that treatment, they created about 400 wildlife trees. And also retained a lot of the historic snags that were there. So there's definitely a lot more habitat for cavity nesting birds.
And you guys have been doing some monitoring of that, correct?
Yeah, we've been mapping and taking into account all of the snags that are up there.
So talk to us a little bit about that process. What does that look like? What has your monitoring been doing, and what have you guys been finding?
So we did a lot of permanent plots, just fixed radius permanent plots to look at stocking and average size and age of the trees. But then we also went through it was a 114 acre section to begin with. And then we did another 70 acre section, and we counted every snag. We just walked the whole forest, mapped them, measured them, recorded wildlife usage. And hopefully we can use that to look at them in the future.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to another team do this in the future after prescribed fire and see what kind of recruitment they get of new snags, new wildlife trees, and also if any, like how many were lost because of the fire. It'll be an interesting comparison.
So we got over 600 snags, and we measured them, we mapped them, and we recorded insect and wildlife usage on them. And some of them are really old, some of them are brand new, different heights, widths. So hopefully long term we can kind of figure out what snags are best, what species work best, and how long it takes for woodpeckers and things to move into those newly created snags.
Mm-hmm.
One of the intentions is that this isn't just a one-off visit through the forest, but but there will be an opportunity for others to come. We'll do this repeatedly over time. 5 years from now, we can do the same study of the wildlife trees and the wildlife habitat piles, and have data collection over time.
I'm curious, when you were first learning about your forest and what you know about it now, what do you think your definition of what constitutes a healthy forest has changed?
Well, I think naively, I never really thought about the soil health of a forest. And I think now I really intend for us to be conscious of, from soil to treetop, health of the forest, and that it's a whole ecosystem forest health, as opposed to trees only. I think I was probably naively in the trees are the forest before this project, and especially working with Adam and Tyler.
Have you done any soil monitoring or anything like that to determine your soil characteristics?
Not yet, but we hope that the mastication is a little bit rejuvenating.
Yeah, I was having a really wonderful conversation today with a researcher named Terry Jane, who I hope to have on this podcast one day. And we were talking about variation in forest types and how they are driven largely by soil properties. And so we can see on a hillside there'll be your topography is roughly the same. Your elevation is roughly the same. It's generally a south facing or a north facing slope. There's not any major fundamental changes to it. You're within a similar climactic gradient, but you can walk 200 feet apart from each other. And in one section, you can be in a Douglas fir ponderosa pine stand. And in another section, you can be in a cedar, grand fir, white pine mixture. And one of the key differences between these two sites was primarily ash cap soils. That these soils had this layer of ash, largely as a deposit of many of the volcanic eruptions we'd had on the property. And from that situation, what happens is ash is actually able to hold on to water slightly better. And it additionally adds depth to the soil. And so you have more area that you can hold water, which in turn just leads to these highly productive sites on the forest. And it was really cool to hear that conversation with her, and just to hear how soil can strongly drive the health of a stand. And I'm curious, is there like a site on your property where you can walk 100 feet, 200 feet and can be in a completely different forest type?
Yeah, definitely. On like the south facing slopes here, you can go from a pretty nice old ponderosa forest, and then 100 feet away there won't be any trees, and it'll just be prairie. It's just grass and camas and paintbrush and a ton of other wildflowers. And yeah, the soils do seem different. I have a feeling those are probably a little more shallow.
It is an original prairie. The Swak Prairie is one of those Los prairies that did come from volcanic action and also obviously erosion. But and it's a very clayey soil. There's a lot of gumbo. South facing slopes seem to be rockier.
Yeah,
and the forest hasn't been. It wasn't farmed or manipulated in those ways. It was just cattle probably ran on it a lot, and then the selective cutting.
You guys have been doing tree monitoring. Can you put some numbers behind what the forest density looked like before the harvest and after the harvest?
Yeah. So what numbers we have are from Phil for the previous densities. But we do know that in certain areas, it was between 200 to 250 plus trees per acre. And now in those areas, we're down to about 50 to 60 trees per acre.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned prescribed fire a while back. Is that, are you going to be using that primarily as a prairie restoration tool? Or are you going to be using that in your forest as well? What's the idea there?
So the whole property is in the burn plan, but it'll primarily be a forest focus with the transition between prairie and forest will be part of it. It's become how would you describe it? It's become a ponderosa nursery.
Well, that's really interesting. And honestly, well, I'm in Southwest Washington. They don't do too much burning here besides in some of the sort of oak savanna, historical oak communities, which are unfortunately few and far between these days. But I'm kind of fascinated by the idea that you'll be doing prescribed fire. We've discussed with other guests, how difficult that can be, even on lands with a lot more resources like federal lands or state lands. And so as a private landowner to be doing prescribed fire, it's pretty
Daunting.
Pretty exciting. Yeah, daunting, I'm sure. Absolutely. Do you know, you said next year you're going to be doing it. Do you know the size of the project or any?
We hope it's 2022. We hope it's this fall.
This fall.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear that.
200 acres basically. And we were flagging the fire break line along the property line today. So we'll have a skid line between. So we're starting to prepare with the anticipation. I think Sean, you've mentioned we've got a fair bit of attention on prescribed fire here with the Trex group. That's Rosalind's done quite a bit, both on private and public land. So there is some experience around.
Have you done any sort of community engagement with the local Cle Elum city, just to maybe use this as a teaching opportunity, or even just kind of like getting the community aware that there is going to be a prescribed fire, so people aren't?
I know that Rosalind's done a lot of that with their activities, both on the private and the Roslyn urban forest. We are just in the process of making that plan to reach out, but it's an important element. Yeah.
One of the words we love to throw around is this word stewardship. And so I'm just curious, from your perspective, what does stewardship mean to you, and what does it mean to be a steward of the land as somebody who has, lived on it for the amount of time you have?
Well, it's a really big topic and an important one, and everybody. Stewardship can be simply just being a caretaker, or stewardship can be much more active. And we're taking a very active role in managing the resources that we happen to own for the good of the future. And that includes, employing young talent like Tyler and Adam, and bringing other people into the mix to learn from them and exchange knowledge. We've had field days where we've shared what we're doing. So I see those as all elements of stewardship, not just holding tight to a place, but making it possible for others to learn and benefit. And in the exchange, I hope we learn and benefit from the knowledge. And I feel like some of the places that's happened has been around climate and new practices in forest, and the prescribed fire is all about stewardship. That we are hopefully our landscape will not be a contributor to the bigger problems when fire does come through, by taking care of what we have. So those are all elements.
Tyler and Adam, I'm curious. I want to ask you the same question as students who are pretty new in this field and definitely weren't forestry people. What has been your perception of stewardship been as you've both learned and worked under Martha, but just your time in the woods?
To me, like, this is pretty new. I grew up exploring forests and everything, and I think I was pretty naive about the whole thing before, thinking like a healthy forest was one that was kind of untouched and that humans weren't really a part of. And I was, very wrong about that because humans have been a part of this landscape for thousands of years. And, these forests sort of evolved and adapted with disturbance events driven by people. And so, stewardship to me definitely now means a much more active role in taking care of the forest and making sure there's habitat, and you're, not endangering your neighbors with a dog hair forest or anything like that. And yeah, I think an active role is definitely the best course of action.
That's really well put. And I'm just curious, for you guys, what's the next step? What are you guys, either on the property or elsewhere? I'm also curious, so maybe this is a two-part question. What's going to happen with all that data you're collecting?
Yeah, that's a great question.
That's a good question.
We're still working on that.
Okay.
The job's not done.
Yeah, in terms of next steps, we are looking for new people to bring on because we have another 200-acre section that we want to inventory, but we're trying to kind of pass this along, this opportunity. And so I'm kind of compiling the data just as kind of a report for Martha, and then whatever we decide to do with that, we can talk about that later. We're also working on a manual for forest landowners so that we're developing a method of kind of a basic forest inventory that's not too overcomplicated so that people without a scientific background or a forestry background can conduct this in their own backyard. And it'll just kind of guide them to learn about their forest, how they can do their own inventory, and then how that can lead them into writing a management plan and steering them towards some resources and how they can get involved with actively managing their forest once they figure out what they have and the stocking conditions.
Sean, we should probably try to hire them soon.
We might have to.
Yeah, it sounds like
The manual,
that's
the
really
manual
great.
and the data collection dissertation has to be finished first.
Sure, of course. Yeah.
Have you had any neighbors come up to you in the process and ask questions about the work you're doing and maybe kind of get inspired to do any of that work themselves?
There have been. We're on pretty quiet back roads, so it isn't highly visible. But yes, they have, and other neighbors are starting to think about moving in a similar direction. And other, and nearby neighbors are doing it on their own too through the DNR cost share program. So that's been a really important partner to a number of the forest owners around here.
That's super exciting, honestly. And I love that you incorporated that kind of work, that sort of outreach or demonstration, education into your definition of stewardship. Because it's easy to be an island.
Yeah.
Never, and that's fine too. You can't expect everybody to do that. But I think that's it's really great. And it's great that it's having an impact on the community.
As especially because you were just referencing cost share, is there, actually, let me phrase this as a question. What have been some of the challenges that you've faced as a landowner that you think still exist and you would like, the community or maybe the forestry community or those listening to try to change if there's something we could try to work towards?
I would say that the more cost share, first of all, and then cost share for a deeper resource of what is a healthy forest. In other words, related to wildlife habitat piles and wildlife trees and really that soil to treetop health, as opposed to just the way the cost share program is set up right now. It could be expanded, and I think it would engender more interest by landowners.
And so I guess, one of the things we love to talk to landowners about, and there might be a right or wrong, there might not be a right or wrong answer for this. But I'm curious, as you are managing your land, have you guys done any sort of succession planning for your forest? And you've talked about your kids and how they enjoy that property. Have you engaged with them in the management of this forest?
Yeah, they're very tuned into it. Absolutely.
Do you guys do anything like conservation easements or any sort of work with land grant or sorry, not land grants, but land trusts?
In my volunteer world, I spend a great deal of time, and both my husband Jerry Tone and I spend a lot of time with the Trust for Public Land and the land conservation movement. So we're very active in that whole arena. And currently, our property is not in an easement.
So I'm wondering if there's like a central place where people can follow. I think I got a really good picture of what you're doing. I think it's really awesome. I mostly just want to be able to stay tuned to some degree. It sounds like you guys are really generating a lot, and it sounds like at some point, there's going to be manuals and other works and what the farm is doing. Also, do you have a name for the farm? Because I don't know if I've heard that one yet.
It's just family property right now. So, but we are calling it the Swat Prairie Experimental, just as a placeholder for the things that we're doing in the forest. But it doesn't have any branding at this point.
Sure, I like that.
You guys should definitely make an Instagram and start posting your stories along.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea, actually.
I would love to keep it up. And honestly, it sounds like one of the cool things we could do with this conversation is have you guys back on in another year and talk to you about what's changed, and what new things have you done. Definitely what was the result of that prescribed fire, how that went, what some of the changes you see from that. I'm very excited to see.
Come take a walk about and see it. We'll do some other field days coming up, so I'll drop you a note.
Better yet, we could just do a podcast in the field.
Yeah.
while the prescribed fire is happening.
Some of the things that I actually, another element is that Adam and Tyler put up cameras at various points around the wildlife piles and just seeing what's happening out there, and caught a night image of a flying squirrel.
Oh, wow.
That's pretty cool.
Okay. Yeah, Ken Bevis had this great idea for how we could sift through hundreds of thousands of pictures over a couple months. But yeah, we got a lot of really cool stuff on the cameras.
How much activity have you guys been seeing on those wildlife piles?
Quite a bit.
Yeah.
A lot of we put up 40 cameras from 1 month, 2 months,
1 month,
1 month, just on a variety, like 30 piles. And I mean, we had hundreds of thousands of pictures. A lot of them were kind of misfires, but we had like dozens of species, and we were trying to do a occupancy study on it, which is still kind of in the works. The biostatistics on that are still going on. But yeah, they definitely get a lot of use by a lot of different types of animals.
Yeah.
Well, perfect. So thank you very much, Martha, Tyler, and Adam, for joining us today on the Forest Overstory podcast. We really look forward to hearing the rest of your guys' story as you continue onwards and you're monitoring data and your prescribed fire. We just want to say thank you, and thank you to all of our listeners today for joining us on the Forest Overstory. Have a nice day.